what it is, and if there's the best part, I'll bring them up so I can help the timeline of the committee. But what this bill basically does today, re-regulation and deregulation. If what we're doing today is working, if this bill passes, this just simply says we're going to keep doing what we're doing today. That's all it does. It's actually quite simple in that you're going to hear lots of testimony arguments saying, well, this doesn't do this, this, that. All we're doing is voice over IP services. We're going to allow the regulations that are happening today continue, and we're just not asking the PUC to put any more burdens on it. So that's what the bill does in front of you, Mr. Chair. Do you have any additional testimony? I may have, yes, I have a couple. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with testimony.
My comments brief. I know you've got a lot to do tonight. I'm outside counsel to the Minnesota Cable Communications Association. Thank you for the opportunity today to address the Cable Association's strong support for House File 1665. House File 1665 is important legislation for our state that will speed the deployment of strong competitive options for voice communication services, particularly in greater Minnesota. They'll provide greatly needed regulatory certainty with respect to voice communication services, encourage greater broadband investment in greater Minnesota, will preserve existing landline phone services for all Minnesotans and preserve consumer protections available to all Minnesotans. It will strengthen the 911 Telephone Assistance Program and the Telecommunications Access Minnesota programs by requiring all voice-over internet providers to pay into these funds and file 911 plans. Finally, it will move Minnesota into the 21st century, joining 33 other states to modernize their telecommunications laws like this toward a national uniform policy. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll leave my comment at that. Thank you.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, John Dukich with the Minnesota High Tech Association. We are a trade association that represents more than 300 science and technology companies and organizations throughout the state. And I will keep my comments brief and just direct you to a letter in your packet in support of House File 1665. MHTA feels that by providing a level of regulatory certainty with respect to VoIP, House File 1665 helps to send a strong signal that Minnesota embraces technology-friendly policies and encourages private investment to help expand our broadband infrastructure to all corners of the state. Modernizing the state's telecommunications regulatory framework, as more than 30 other states have done, will help accelerate investment in new communication technologies and expand access to broadband. And with that, we ask for your support. Thank you. Do you have any testimony? This is a public hearing. Are there any members of the public who wish to testify in favor or voice concerns with the bill? Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, Ron Elwood with Legal Aid. As always, it's so troubling to be on the other side representing the free chef, but I will be doing that. If this bill simply froze regulation, we would be having a very different discussion here. And we do not believe it does that at all. We in fact believe it does the opposite. We believe that this completely deregulates phone service in Minnesota, especially if you use VoIP, which technology, which virtually all the phone companies can do. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter if the phone call is provided through copper, fiber, cable, or VoIP. What we're talking about is a phone call. A phone call is a phone call. There's really no rationale, public policy rationale, to treat VoIP any differently than we treat any other phone call. What this bill does is eliminate the PUC's authority over local phone calls made through VoIP. And by doing so, it effectively renders virtually all the laws and rules that protect consumers meaningless and unenforceable. And asking you to eliminate oversight and protection around one type of delivery by VoIP versus delivery by other mechanisms is like saying we should regulate UPS differently than we regulate FedEx. That's just illogical. Here is in fact what the bill does, and some, but not all, of the harmful impacts that you will be voting for if you voted to include this in your omnibus bill, Mr. Chair.
And Mr. Elwood, just to be clear, you're not voting on the bill today, so should there be a vote on this in the future, I would understand why there may be some very in-depth testimony, but an answer between members. Mr. Eagles, please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the future, should you have voted for this bill, this is what you would be voting for. First of all, there will be no any notice of disconnection or protection against arbitrary and unwanted shut-off of phone service. There would be no protection against price, geographic, or discrimination. There would be no recourse against cramming, that is, sticking unauthorized charge slipped into the bill. And if you don't think that happens, I have an article here from Forbes that talks about a phone giant AT&T caught padding consumers' bill with unwarranted services. It's known as cramming, and this happens. There'll be no protection against fly-by-night phone companies coming into Minnesota and providing services, because PC would no longer have to certify companies as being legit or have any power to get rid of them if they did something wrong. There would be no more over reliability of 911, despite what that testifier said, because VoIP phone calls would be no longer regulated by the PUC. And if you don't think that's a problem, I have a news story here that talks about having gaps when home service is routed through 911 calls routed through the internet via voice over protocol. The geographic information transferred when somebody calls 911 doesn't always work with VoIP phones. That's a problem. But first and foremost, this is really a legal matter. What you're doing here is overruling a PUC decision in the charter case that ruled that fixed calls are phone calls that must follow the existing rules. And that case turns on a highly legal and technical debate about a definition in the 1996 Telecommunications Act. That case is now in federal district court here in Minnesota. A decision is imminent. Undoubtedly, that case will wind up in the United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit, and maybe even in the United States Supreme Court. And if before that happens, the FCC or Congress may step in to solve the issue. And with all due respect, we believe the Minnesota legislature should defer to those judicial, elected, or administrative bodies to make the call about whether to deregulate service. I can go on, but I won't, because I know you're pressed for time. The reality is that this is a deregulation bill. It will not provide any incentive to invest in broadband across Minnesota, which we've heard. It will deregulate all the protections that exist today, and I would strongly urge you not to move forward with this bill. Happy to answer any questions.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, for the committee, my name is Mary Jo George with AARP Minnesota. On behalf of our members, we are here today to also speak in opposition of this bill because it would unnecessarily eliminate important consumer protections relating to an increasingly popular telecommunication services known as VoIP. All the telecommunications use of technologies based on internet protocol, or otherwise known as IP. Consumers level service and meet regular is delivered. Telephone communication remains a basic necessity, allowing older Minnesotans, whether they live in urban neighborhoods or in rural areas of the state, to maintain social contact, to preserve health and safety, and gain assistance in an emergency. And make no mistake about it, VoIP technology is essentially a wireline or communication. We also think it's important to point out then that the amendment that we had on the last committee in subdivision 5 is somewhat misleading. The language that says preservation of existing landline service, nothing in the section will restrict or modify a company's ability to offer phone service. Well, two things to that. First of all, as I said, many of the phone says it can offer language. It eliminates all the consumer protections we have, folks. We don't think that's necessary. I think the last point I want to make is that we know consumer demand for VoIP is steadily growing, but there is no evidence that the state's regulatory framework is impeding the industry's broadband investment. We think these companies are profitably offering VoIP as part of their marketing strategy, and we do believe in new technologies. Contrary to the rhetoric, we don't think it's a new option. We believe it should have protection that important to technology, and that we should become aggressive withholding innovation and investment in Minnesota. They should be ignored, and we ask you to oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. As Deputy Commissioner Grant comes down, quick question for both of us. There's no fiscal note on this bill, so this is a massive deregulation of it. We would see some sort of fiscal cost. Why is that?
Mr. Chair, I think that would be the Department of Commerce's purview to answer that.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Grant. Welcome to the committee, sir. Good to see you again.
Mr. Chairman and members, good afternoon. My name is Bill Grant. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Energy and Telecommunications at the Department of Commerce. And I want to thank you for allowing me to share some comments and concerns with you regarding House File 1665. And let me begin by stating that the Department supports the comments made today regarding the importance of consumer protections that are currently provided to Minnesota telephone customers by Mr. Elwood and Ms. George. These are common sense protections that this legislature has determined over the years that all Minnesotans who receive telephone service should have. Things such as requiring that notice be given before service can be disconnected, requiring notice of the cost of service before it's increased, and requiring telephone companies to complete calls to rural customers and charge the same prices for the same services it charges metro customers in its service area. House File 1665 is a significant change in telecommunication regulation as it regulates based on technology rather than the service provided to consumers. Government here is picking winners and losers rather than the marketplace. If the service is the same, shouldn't consumer protections and the role of government also be the same? But even before that, the committee should consider an even more basic question, and this is one that was raised by Mr. Elwood. Is this a discussion that needs to take place at this time? There is a lawsuit currently pending in federal court that will decide whether the state has the authority to regulate fixed VoIP telephone service. If it decides the state does not, then this legislation is completely irrelevant, and this committee has spent valuable time on something it didn't need to do. If, on the other hand, the federal court determines that the state does have authority, then that would be a reasonable time to consider what, if any, changes to the requirements and protections provided to customers for telephone service are necessary in light of the changes in technology. One last thing to consider is the effect this bill will have on the rates and availability of telephone service to Minnesotans in rural areas where the cost of providing service is substantially higher than the metro area. Before the drastic changes made by this bill are passed, it would be prudent to consider how much rural customer telephone rates will increase and whether service would still be available to everyone in rural areas. Thanks for providing the department the opportunity to discuss our concerns with the bill.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. This is a public hearing. Are there any other members of the public wish to testify in favor or voice concerns of the bill? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion with the member questions and comments. Representative Mayquay. Representative Mahoney, and then Mayquay.
Actually, Mr. Grant should come back to the table here. I have a question for Representative Krisha and Mr. Grant. We required that we come out of a bill. I think it's been here. Is this bill 665 any different governor has said time and time again he does not support.
Representative Grisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Mahoney. The best answer I can give to that is this is an issue where I've been working with the governor's office, the Department of Commerce, Department of Education, and just as the one that I ran through with the NPA, it took a long time for people to actually understand what we're doing here. The reality is, I think that there are many other groups that are trying to influence this in different ways. I'm trying to get to the basic proposition of this, which is all the things that are happening in the analog phone line don't need to happen on the VoIP side because it's fundamentally different. When my son calls me through Facebook, we don't need to regulate that.
Deputy Commissioner Grant.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Mahoney, I don't speak for the governor, obviously, and I can't say what his position would be on the bill this time around. However, the bill is virtually identical to last year's bill, which he vetoed. So the committee should take that for what it's worth, and I wouldn't be here expressing our concerns if those concerns had been already dealt with.
Thank you.
Representative Meekway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Chris, can you explain to me why not discriminating on rates, universal service, notice before cutting off, or disconnection, how that impedes broadband or investments in broadband?
Representative Grisha.
I'm not sure if you could be more specific with the question.
Representative Meekway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think from some of the testimony at the very beginning, that this would speed up options and encourage investments in broadband in greater Minnesota if we do your bill. And from what I'm understanding is that essentially removes consumer protections, including warning for disconnection of service, regional rates, no discrimination of rates, cramming. Can you explain to me how those consumer protections impede the ability to invest in broadband in greater Minnesota?
Representative Grisha.
I think those consumer protections are fine. They're in place now, and if my bill were to go on and get signed, none of those would go away in their current form.
Representative Meekway.
So, you're gonna, in your bill, if it goes into law, even if someone called through, but to a landline, so it would be void technically, right?
Well, it depends.
Representative Grisha.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if someone were to call, pick up their own landline, and call somebody else on a landline, and it happened to be void, right? It goes through cable, fiber optic, whatever, not analog. That would still be covered by the universal service, regional rates, no discrimination, notice for disconnecting service.
Representative Grisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you use a rotary dial telephone with an analog phone system, there are consumer protections in place for that system. If you use your cell phone, there are service requirements and protections in place. Part of that is free market. If you don't like your cell phone service, you're probably going to get different cell phone service. What I am saying in this bill is if we pass this bill, what we have today stays in place. And we don't take all of those old regulations that were applied when Dr. Graham Bell first made his connections and port those over to a technology that is moving faster than those regulations.
Representative Meekway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think part of what I'm confused about, Representative Crucia, is that VoIP already exists, am I correct?
It does. Representative Meekway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that if we're not putting regulations on new technology, it's already existing. And from the arguments I heard at the beginning is that that is impeding, those regulations are impeding investments in broadband. And I just want to understand how that's happening.
Representative Grisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A perfect example of this is if we, essentially if my bill doesn't go into effect, you basically are asking the PUC to regulate VoIP. And if you put in more regulations and you start to put in regulations that apply to the analog systems because we believe that's the right thing to do, companies like Facebook and Google that are using different technologies to connect people are going to give pause. And they're going to say, why would we go there? And so that's why I'm asking for certainty and asking for modernization of regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still don't think I would quite understand how that investment in broadband in greater Minnesota, more because when protections are in place and someone makes the argument that removing those protections will allow them to do more things, have more money,
they would be, I don't know what the appropriate term is, not doing the protections that were in place before. And so I guess I'm just really not understanding, the argument for doing this, especially considering the court case. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll speak to the best can. So first of all, we're not moving any regulations in. What is happening today is what I'm saying should happen tomorrow. And if this goes in place, we're adding as far as the court case, the argument that comes down, and in the first court case, and I don't have all the specifics, the first court case, the argument was, is VoIP telephone service in the traditional sense? And the argument came back and said, no, VoIP is different technology. And so therefore it should not be treated as that. And so that is what's being argued in the case. And in every single case so far that we've had, the argument is, and it's been upheld by the courts, is that VoIP is not analog telephone service.
I think, staff, I think what we're going to do is we're going to create a YouTube clip of the debate last year on the House floor with Representative Sanders and Representative Johnson. We're going to put that together as a briefing video for members of the committee to watch that so that we don't have that happen before again.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, so Representative Maker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I lost my, to the court case, thank you. So, you've said in the court cases, it's been decided every time that VoIP is not like telephone service, and so why this bill, why not wait for the court to decide?
Representative Grisham.
Frankly, because I don't see a whole lot more than created. I think we have now.
Representative Maker.
I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. If what we're doing now is working, why wouldn't we put that into certain?
Representative Maker.
Representative, I would imagine if something's in a court case, it's not working. I guess I just fear that we're conflating, your son calling you over Facebook versus someone who's hard of hearing or needs a different type of assistance over the phone. No one really has a say over what kind of transmission a phone call is happening in, and I worry that we're removing protections, maybe unintentionally, for folks, particularly the greater Minnesota, because we're conflating what the internet is over what a phone is. I don't think they answered, Mr. Chair, so I think we'll stop.
Any other questions or comments from members? Representative Grisham, any closing comments?
No, Mr. Chair.